This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 120. Will Critchlow. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 120 of Experts on the Wire. You'll definitely want to pay attention to this episode to gain a deeper understanding of where Google and SEO has come from, how that matters now, and for some interesting discussion about ranking factors and the Google algorithm. Will Critchlow is my guest today. He's the CEO of Search Pilot and SEO partner at Brain Labs, which acquired the agency Distilled. He talked to me about some really fascinating stuff, one being how do core updates of today relate to the old idea of the Google dance? How might nofollow being a hint impact rankings in SEO? How and why can SEO split testing be valuable? Is it valuable? And just want to note that this episode was recorded in August of 2020, just for context, because we do talk a little bit about COVID and real life events. I do want to let you know that Search Love that we mentioned is now rescheduled as a virtual event happening in March 2021. I'll put a link to the show notes about that. And before we get to today's episode, I want to briefly mention United Search. United Search is a first-of-its-kind SEO speaker accelerator program. They're not an official sponsor, but I really want to share their program with you, the audience. You can visit unitedsearch.org to become a mentee, mentor, and learn more. And I'll actually have a special guest with me a little bit later in this episode tell you a bit more about United Search. But for now, let's get into episode 120 of Experts in the Wire with Will Critchlow. Will, why don't we jump in? I'm curious if you can first tell us when and why you began Distilled.
Going right back. So 2005 was when we got started. And back then, it took us a while to focus in on SEO. We started out as web design and development for small businesses. And that was really, at the time, really, although we started a company, it was pretty much my co-founder and I essentially doing contract work. We were really not much more than freelancers. We didn't have an office, we didn't have any employees, any of that kind of stuff. But we'd known we wanted to start a business, and we'd kind of committed that to each other at the end of high school, and we'd said this is a thing we're going to do, and then we'd been waiting for the idea, and anybody who remembers the .com bust, or boom and bust, I guess the boom time, it was all about the idea. It was like, it's going to be at-home delivery for pet food, or, it was that like one-line elevator pitch. And we spent a long time thinking we needed the idea. And then the bust happened, and it was like, well, why don't we just do some stuff that makes some money? And so actually back in the 90s, we'd been building small business websites and so forth, and so that's what we got started doing, and then SEO came from there. And I think for context too, by the way, I think we're the same age. I just turned 41, so I also grew up during that time of like you said, the boom in the early 2000s and the crash, and then building back up again and all that stuff. So I'm curious though, what brought you into SEO? Right? Was this something that you were doing the client work and then people were asking you about, so then you're like, yeah, hey, let's figure it out and try it? Yeah, it was a combination, I think, of a big chunk of pull. Like you say, clients were coming to us saying, it's great that you built this website, but what we really care about is getting more business from the website. And I think we'd always positioned ourselves as the business website folk. Like there were a lot of people, you remember back then, there were a lot of people building very flashy, literally in Flash, beautiful websites that didn't do a great deal for the business that they were building them for. They came from a design background or whatever else. And
they're almost like an online business card, like a glorified online catalog.
That's right. And some of them were beautiful, but they weren't focused on the business needs. And I'd come from a consulting background. My co-founder came from a very technical background, and neither of us were designers. So frankly, this was kind of trying to judo move our weakness into our strength, was to say, well, our website might not be beautiful, but it's going to work for your business. And we positioned ourselves as being about helping businesses. And then they were saying to us, well, it's great, but how can we get more? How do we get more traffic? How do we get more visibility? And remember, in 2005, 2006, search was the only game in town. This was pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook newsfeed. So paid and organic search were the only games. And I think really that was most of it. And then the other side was I had a kind of academic interest in it. So coming at a little bit the information retrieval side, but actually even more so back then, the paid side, because my degree actually ended up specializing in auction theory. And, the AdWords is the biggest auction in the world. And so I'd been fascinated in that side of things, kind of from an academic perspective. But no, it was really commercial. It was businesses wanting it.
And who's your co-founder, by the way, of Distilled?
That was Duncan Morris. We still work together. He's still active in Search Path today.
And at that time, was providing SEO as a service, as an agency, it was much more of a scammy black hat, snake oil thing back then, right? So did you have a vision for Distilled that was doing something of a higher caliber, right? Because when I think of Distilled, I think of like a higher quality version of, where SEO came from.
Yeah, I don't know about, I probably wouldn't use the word quality so much as sustainability. I think that we actually, I have a lot of respect for folks who want to game the algorithm, and certainly back then there was a lot of kind of cat and mouse activity, and there was some very high quality work being done in a certain sense, but it wasn't it wasn't the kind of thing that I ever felt like. Back then I felt like I couldn't go to a small business owner and say, this is your livelihood, and I'm going to bet on the fact that I can outrun Google's algorithm and not screw things up for you. So when we're working with small businesses, it was really that kind of, it's I guess a safety aspect. And then as we got to work with big brands, I guess an equivalent thing, but it was more like, I'm not going to risk your job over this. And so, yeah, for me, that's never been so much of a moral position. There are things that I think are moral issues if you're talking, hacking or, injecting links through cross-site scripting attacks or all that kind of thing. But in terms of, the morality of trying to outpace Google, no, I don't see that as a moral question, but more, we came at it from we were trying to do what, I guess can be called white hat, but we were trying to do things that we felt would be sustainable and bring genuine value to the websites that we were helping and their users, crucially.
Yeah, I like that distinction because you can do high quality black hat. So quality is maybe not, but I like that sustainable way of looking at it. So what was the relationship between Moz and Distilled? I know there was, definitely a lot of collaboration and similar people, and then the associate program. And also in that relationship, were there any negatives that ever came with that? I know Moz occasionally can get picked on sometimes for certain ways they might go about a ranking factor study or the tools or the domain authority. And so, what was that relationship like? So
the part of the history of the relationship is that in the beginning, we were just members of the community. And again, back to pre-Twitter days, the community used to hang out in the Moz blog comments, right? Like the trash talking and the rumor mill and everything else was in blog comments rather than on Twitter. So we were just learning in the very early days. And then we got to know a few of the folks over there. Rebecca Kelly, first Mozer we ever met in person when she made a trip to the UK. And we got to know her and actually her boyfriend, now husband, met us in London. And then that meant that we then got an in and we met Rand and a few other senior folk on one of their trips. And probably the best ROI dinner we ever bought was I don't even think we got to pay for the whole thing. I think we split the check, but we went out for dinner in, I think, what must have been 2006 or 7. And all of that stuff I was just saying about sustainability, we kind of realized that we thought about things in a similar way. We were trying to achieve similar things through different means. And that led to the associate program, which led then to us delivering a lot of work behind the scenes. So as they got out of consulting, we were gradually delivering more and more of their consulting work. Then till they actually quit consulting when they raised their venture round and focused on their SaaS products. And at that point, I remember Rand called me over a weekend in late 2009 and said, do you want to open up an office in Seattle? because we're getting out of the consulting business. And we kind of asked around, and Rob Ousby was up for a trip out, a trip out there. He's still there.
Yeah.
So in fact, he now works at Moz, of course. But he then ran our Seattle office for almost a decade, and so we at that stage it just became more of an arm's length kind of relationship. After they kind of got completely out of consulting, it was just like we're friends, and it was less of a business relationship at that point.
Yeah, that's cool. And for context too, 2009 is when I had barely just started SEO myself. So everything we've talked about so far is leading up to like when I started. So, and in your article,
and then there's like another wave of it.
Right. There's another wave. And your article in the title, it says 15 years is a long time in the SEO industry. And we're covering a very large time range. So bring us up to just today, because I want to know what you're up to right now. And then we're going to go back and talk some about some of these key moments in SEO. And then we'll come back to the present and to the state of the industry now. But what is Search Pilot and what is Brain Labs?
Yeah, well, actually, this is the recent evolution. So Distilled, as I mentioned, started in 2005. We then, over the last few years, had been building within Distilled. We first of all formed an R&D team. And so that was just trying to figure out ways that we could improve the ways we work with technology. And my co-founder, Duncan, actually was working in that team, kind of wanted to go back to his engineering and product roots, and was building technology. That then turned into the product that became the ODN, the Optimization Delivery Network, which became Search Pilot. And it's somewhat convoluted story, but anyway, long story short, we spun that out as its own company. That was then a business unit for a couple of years within Distilled. At the beginning of 2020, we spun out Search Pilot as its own company, which is still owned by the original Distilled shareholders, almost entirely. And then we sold the rest of the business, so the consulting and conferences business, we sold to a company called Brain Labs, who are mainly a paid search and biddable media specialist agency, another UK agency with a US presence. And so they wanted to add SEO into their offering, and those businesses went really well together. And so our consulting business is now part of Brain Labs, and Search Pilot is an independent software business. And what Search Pilot does is a combination of SEO, A/B testing, and what we call a meta CMS, which is the ability for our kind of big customers to make changes to any page on their website, which is the kind of thing you should be able to do in a CMS. But of course, we all know the reality that in SEO, it's tough to do that.
Great. So we'll circle back and chat about the A/B testing stuff a little bit later. But I do want to dive into the key moments in SEO on the article on Moz. So this article just came out, and I thought it was really fascinating. We don't have to cover every single thing in here, but I did want to jump to a moment that really kind of hit me is like I said, I've been doing SEO since like 2009, 2010. So your heading that says index everything, and something happened in April 2003. What does that mean? Was there a point in search when they didn't index everything? And what is the key moment that happened here?
I wouldn't so much say there was a moment when they chose, a time before this when they chose not to, when their goal was not to index a lot of things. It's more that Google gradually became incredibly much better than anything that had gone before at indexing massive websites. And this is, I think, a combination of their PageRank-based algorithm being okay to kind of cope with a massive index, as in like rank a massive index very well, whereas previous algorithms have been less good at that. So it was okay for them to have a massive index. And then coupled with some of the stuff that is now getting them in trouble for antitrust kind of stuff, where the kind of the positive flywheels they had that meant that they were making tons of money, and they were reinvesting that into crawling and indexing technology, such that they were crawling and indexing the web deeper, further, faster than anybody else had ever done.
So was the challenge with indexing, was it less of a scale challenge and more of a challenge of, okay, once we have everything in the index, how do we rank it and deliver that in a search result for like a long tail search? So was it a scale issue or more of a quality issue with indexing?
I would say at first this was a scale issue, and it was something that they they basically benefited massively from the fact that their algorithm was ready to work on a massive web index. And all they needed to do was build a massive web index, if you see what I mean, like all they needed to do, right? And so if you look at some of the innovations that happened in that early 2000s era, that was when Google really professionalized, right? Google went from being, if you look online, you'll see, early photos of their Server X with, held together with sticky tape and string. And then they professionalize and they start building the things that become Spanner and Borg and all of their internal tooling and methodologies to be able to build and maintain these massive server architectures that really nobody else was doing back then. Because remember, this is before Amazon Web Services. This is before the cloud, really. And so Google was the first in that. And so I think, it was a case of they had an algorithm that was good, pour a massive amount of crawling and indexing capability into it, and straight away get amazing long tail results. That then, of course, didn't factor in Ocelot. Right. So as soon as SEOs figured out that this was happening and they started feeding the beast, then that's when the quality issues started happening. So this sowed the seeds of the quality issues that became the need for Panda and Penguin, Panda in particular, where SEOs were just dumping huge amounts of content. Any database you could think of, you could create pages and they'd get indexed and they'd rank for something. And typically those could be very, very, very low quality search results. But at the beginning, when it was just, no, the web is there, let's index all of it, that was pretty much a good thing. It was kind of pretty much unvarnished good, I think, for Google and for searchers. And then it was the second order effects when it's like, when everybody realized that's what was happening, and you spun up business models that said, well, fine, let's just ram some more content in there.
So was this what we would call caffeine, or is that something different, or that came later?
Caffeine came a little later. I'm not a historian. I struggle with the exact ordering, the exact dates, but the caffeine was really, I think, underpinned the ability to iterate faster.
I see it in one of your charts. So, it says 2009 on one of your charts. It says integrate indexation and ranking in near real time.
Yeah. So I think I think you can see that as the beginning of another wave of change at Google.
Okay.
So where in one sense, Panda was the end of a cycle. So in one sense, there was this cycle that went index deeper, crawl faster than ever before, build the biggest index, et cetera, et cetera. That led to the problems that Panda had to fix. Caffeine, on the other hand, is more like the beginning of a cycle. Caffeine was the ability to allow them to iterate their algorithm more quickly because they didn't have to recalculate on the entire web. This is my kind of, there's a bit of fuzziness in here. My understanding is that this was the bit where, in order to calculate PageRank, for example, or any kind of link-based algorithm that takes an input of the whole web, that used to be a batch process, and then Caffeine made that much more of a recalculatable thing, a thing they could do on the fly, which meant that you could iterate more quickly, and that led to a lot of other opportunities.
And you have a heading in here that is titled "A Real Reputational Threat." I'm kind of skimming here, but what is this section all about in the key moments of Google and SEO?
Yes, I think this is the first time. So this is actually, this is related to that, the problems that they caused themselves, or that the ecosystem caused when they started indexing any content you could throw at them. And this was kind of the first time that I think there was widespread criticism of the quality of Google's search results. And if you think about just a layperson, if you think about 2002 or whenever, that kind of era, when Google was just becoming a household name, and if you were kind of techie, you were probably the person saying to your friends and relatives, "Hey, you shouldn't use this other search engine. You should use Google." And it's funny to think of now, but people were just getting to grips with the idea that this was that they would get better search results. That then remained true pretty much for that next almost decade or so. But that late 2000s was when it started bubbling out into the mainstream, first in the developer community, but then I think more broadly that there were problems with Google's search results. And this was things like the most visible thing was that there were a lot of scrapers mean, there are still a lot of scrapers, but there were a lot of scrapers that were ranking, right? So the people were copying other websites and outranking those websites with their own content. And very visible in the developer community was the fact that Stack Overflow was being outranked for its own, like people were stealing its content and then outranking Stack Overflow. Wow. And so you do a search for some programming related query, and instead of finding you'd find an answer, but it wasn't the canonical source of that answer. It was somebody who'd copied the website that had originally made that answer.
And isn't
so
that where
you can imagine that kind of bubbling out into the community and people complaining about it and so forth.
Yeah. So and isn't that where the misunderstood duplicate content penalty in air quotes comes from? Because it was more, I try to refer to it as a scraped content penalty, because there is no duplicate content penalty. It can cause issues. It can cause filtering and stuff like that. But I do remember, I believe Matt Cutts, when he was making his videos and people around that era talking about the problems of duplicate content, but really I feel like they were more referring to this issue of scraped content.
Yeah, so I think most of the time when Matt would have been talking about duplicate content, he was probably talking about, like you say, copied content, scraped content.
Right.
I think but we needed Google to fix that, really, because there's very little you can do about somebody scraping your content and republishing it. Right? I mean, you could try kind of a whack-a-mole kind of file DMCA requests for each time it happens, but really you can't guarantee that nobody's going to copy your website. So we needed Google to fix that centrally. Whereas I think in the SEO community, that there's the idea of on-site duplicate content. And that can be exact copies, like you can literally visit different URLs and get the same page. Or it can be this idea of near duplicates, which can happen with pagination or various other problems. And those, I think, that's more of a performance issue. So that's less about kind of, it's fine if Google filters out the ones you don't want and returns the one you do want. That's okay. But the idea here is that you would be kind of diluting your authority by having multiple pages competing with each other. You might even be it might pick the wrong one, right? So you might get a page ranking that isn't the one that is the canonical version. All this kind of stuff. And so this leads to the kind of recommendations you see in a kind of technical audit that, people say, hey, you've got duplicate content because you can access this via multiple URLs. So I think that's more of a housekeeping thing.
Yeah. And it's very crazy how if I randomly do a webinar now, or when I used to speak in person or go in and do consulting for a company and I mention to them, there's no duplicate content penalty, everybody is completely shocked when I say that. So there's still somehow been a pervasive myth that goes, I think pretty much most SEOs know there's no duplicate content penalty, but broader than that, like your typical content editor or writer or VP of marketing, they all think there's a duplicate content penalty. And it's very interesting. How does a myth like that stay so pervasive? Because just last week I gave a webinar and somebody was completely shocked when I said there's no duplicate content penalty. I think perpetuate.
A lot of it is semantics, right? Like, does it matter whether it's implemented as a penalty or a filter if the effect is that your website doesn't show up? For example,
yes.
Some of it is sloppiness of language or the difference between carefully describing the real technical effects versus just chatting about what's happened to your website. My website has been hit, or my website is underperforming, or my website is penalized. Right? Those might be synonyms if you're just speaking casually. Whereas, you mentioned Matt Cutts. He was the master of legal-esque framing, like kind of, he would pick his words incredibly carefully, and you had to parse very carefully. And I think this is a kind of classic thing from many big companies, but particularly from Googlers, is they will say things that are technically correct if you pay close enough attention to the exact phrasing of what they say. But it's not always. Sometimes it can be misleading because you hear it in the kind of vernacular rather than the careful legalistic way they're meaning it.
So I wanted to get your take on core updates. I think you finished the article with a few thoughts on that. And I want to bring also the listeners to, most of everyone listening is doing SEO in some way or trying to learn about SEO to improve their business or their website. So what's your take on what core updates are? I like the few sentences I read in the article. And I sort of also think a lot of what you hear from, the quote unquote famous SEOs SEOs or the headlines also kind of miss the mark a little bit on what core updates are in terms of how they describe them. So what is your take on core updates? And then how can people think about, trying to consider those when they're doing SEO?
Yeah, well, let's start with the history, because I actually think this is a return to some of the ways that we had to work way back when. So if you go back to early 2000s, and people who are in the industry way back might remember the concept of the Google dance and the idea that Google would only periodically update its rankings, right? And they would be cached in different data centers. And so depending which data center you were hitting, you might see different search results. But apart from that kind of rollout process, you could do all of the SEO work you wanted, and nothing would change about your rankings until they did an update. And then we got very used to the idea that a lot of this was real time, right? So that if you got recrawled and reindexed, boom, you would rank better or rank worse. Some of those things still took a little longer. If you're talking about link changes to the link graph, then of course people would still have to. Not only would your website have to get indexed, but the people who link to you have to get reindexed, and then Google has to recalculate the page rank and so forth. So in the late 2000s, some updates happened instantly, some still took a while. But what we're seeing with Core Update is kind of going back to this kind of Google Dance-esque thing, where what we're seeing is, and I think Google's kind of confirmed that it works this way, is that if your website goes up or down as the result of a Core Update, then nothing you do will change that until the next Core Update. And so like you might perform better or worse, but not compared to the metrics that the Core Update is looking at. In other words, it's back to a batch process. And and my hypothesis, and this is where everything I said up to there is I think is fairly undisputed. The bit that others may not agree with, but that is my hypothesis, is that what's going on here is back then the batch process was re-crawling, re-indexing. Then there was a middle time when the batch process was recalculating the link algorithms, so PageRank and the like. Now, I think the batch process is retraining the deep learning model. So I think that what's happening is each core update, they're releasing a new model, a newly trained neural network, artificial intelligence, deep learning model. And that the reason, therefore, that it doesn't really matter. So supposing they release a core update that, I don't know, like we saw some recently where a lot of lower authority medical sites did very badly, right? So if you had medical information, but you weren't a medical school or a government site or those kinds of things, then maybe you dropped in rankings. That might have been a deliberate effect in the core update. But if you then went out and improved your authority, you wouldn't necessarily rank any better until the next core update. And I think the reason for that is that this deep learning model is kind of overfitted to the shape of the current web. It essentially learns which websites are good and which websites are bad, in a very kind of loose way of speaking. And nothing you can do will change its mind until the next learning algorithm batch process. And so that's very much just hypothesis, but that's how I think things might be working these days.
Yeah, because a few things I see in a core update are you take one page and half the search queries that page was ranking for get completely severed, but then the other half just stay there. So do you think that's the deep learning model understanding something like context or topics? What is this page about, sort of thing? So is there an element to the core updates that's also not only authority, which it sounds like what you're talking about, trust and authority, but also this like understanding of keywords better and how they align to a page and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, I use the authority as an example. I don't think core updates are just about authority. I think they're really about essentially all ranking factors. I can't speak completely authoritatively about this, but my suspicion is that the vast majority of ranking factors these days are essentially the weights are machine learned rather than being, it used to be that they were human tweaked. And in the in days gone by, we've seen various ex-Googlers mainly talking about the process where they would have some hypothesis. Yeah, we should we should square this input, or we should multiply that input by 6, or we should take the logarithm of this input. And that was very much just well, why don't we try this? And then they would run some experiments to see if it resulted in better search results. But it wasn't. It was all humans at the wheel, if you like, changing those controls. Right. I think for the most part that's kind of not true anymore, and that those the weightings of those different inputs are learned. A machine learned.
Yeah. And so you can still see changes in ranking and things like that between core updates, but they're just not as major or significant as
for sure. And I think the crucial thing is they don't particularly reverse or they don't work on exactly the same metrics that the core updates work on. And so, right. If you see this kind of classic drop in a core update, recover in the next core update, that's a very, very common pattern. And that sometimes is because they realize that they've kind of pushed the dial too far, and the next core update undoes what the first one did. But in many cases, that's because core update happens, website makes changes, but they're not factored in until the next core update.
Right. I've even heard them say that it could take 2 core updates to pick up on changes. So a long time. What are your thoughts on this whole notion of that no follow is now a hint, I believe? It's something I have a little familiarity with. I think about it, but in my day-to-day, I'm not really focused on tweaking no follow versus follow, or even looking at links at that depth. Do you think, what does this mean exactly for the link graph, for rankings? Was it something maybe Google was doing before they announced it? I'd be curious to hear your take, if any at all.
So this is pure speculation, but I actually wrote an article in I think 2007. It might have been 2009. It was certainly over a decade ago. No, it was post Twitter, so I think it must have been 2009. Where I said I thought that Google was going to start deciding for themselves whether to how to interpret a nofollow, because I think it's a useful signal. But if you what I basically said was, if every links off Twitter are in theory like some of the most the highest signal to noise ratio links that you can imagine. The links that if I tweet a link, that's got my name attached to it. It's got I'm doing that personally. I'm not necessarily endorsing the viewpoint, but in terms of the link graph, it's an editorial link of the kind that you would imagine should factor into a ranking algorithm. And of course, they're all no followed. Every link off Wikipedia is no followed. More and more newspaper websites blanket no follow all their outbound links. My prediction back then was that Google was going to see that too many of the true editorial links that they ought to want to factor in were blanket no followed, and therefore they would have to make their own determination and just use no follow as a signal. And sure, if you see no follow on links out of blog comments, then you say sure, okay, let's just throw those away because that's just anybody can post those there. But if you're seeing links out of somewhere like Twitter, you can make your own estimation, because you can do your own kind of authority evaluation of a Twitter account in a whole variety of ways.
I see. Interesting.
And so I felt like they were going to need to do something like this. Now, of course, there's sayings in the financial markets that being it's not enough to be right. You have to be right about and timely. So I'm not sure I can claim this prediction that came true a decade later was some kind of impression, whatever. But nonetheless, eventually that's where they've ended up. And so I think it's unsurprising, personally. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if they've been doing it for a long time. I have no inside information about whether that's true or not, but it really wouldn't surprise me.
And I think it's interesting because there was a comment I believe John Mueller made last week about not building links just for the sake of it, or there was something on Twitter going on. It was one of these sort of SEO discussions that happened for a few days. I think it was him saying basically don't focus on getting links from Forbes or something like that. What is your take on evaluating the value of links in general, right? So if you're doing SEO or you're running a business or something like that, strategically, how, in your opinion, should people even think about acquiring links, measuring the value of those? How would you look at that?
I mean, I think this is this is probably the hardest question in SEO. I think it's.
Sorry.
I think it's. Oh no, well, I mean it's fine. I just don't have a good answer. The way I tend to like to think about this is when you're evaluating an active campaign, right? Something that's running right now, you can't tie it to rankings in the moment. You have to tie it to some kind of proxies for link value. And I like, and for that, I actually like things that are relatively not SEO specific, right? Like how many people clicked on the link and came to your website and did something good as a result of it. And if you go way far enough back, link building was about traffic. You know, if you read some of the link building in the 90s, it was about getting a link on high traffic pages who people would then click on the link and buy things from you. So I think there's those kind of metrics. Then at the other extreme, you can do a lot of data analysis to say, overall, how does my link portfolio look? Is what I need in order to rank better? Do I need more links? Is that the problem? Or is in fact the problem my targeting or my content or my technical issues and those kinds of things? What is missing is something in between, right? The connector that takes, that says, how valuable is this link for those rankings? Is essentially an unanswerable question, unfortunately. Now, what we've been doing a little bit at Search Pilot is we've made some progress with this on internal linking. So internal linking, you can run experiments over because they're completely in your control. So you can build a control set, you can build a variant, and you can keep them isolated from each other, and you can run that test and say, hey, you know what? How important are these links? What I kind of hope long term is that we might be able to extrapolate some of that stuff into evaluating external links, not because we can run experiments over them, but just because we've got enough data about internal linking. Right. But right now, honestly, you're poking at the sore bit. Like this is one of the hardest things in SEO, I think.
As promised, we're going to take a brief 2 or 3 minute break, and I want to share a little bit about United Search with you. Like I said, they're not a sponsor, but I really believe in what they're doing. So I wanted to let you, the audience, know about this exciting opportunity. And to do that, I'm going to bring in a special guest, Ashley Berman-Hale. She's one of the founders of United Search, and she's going to tell us all about that. We'll be back with Will in just a few minutes. Can you kind of explain the problem in the SEO industry that United Search is seeking to solve?
Sure. The problem that a lot of us saw and why we came together is there just are the same people on stage all the time. A lot of really great speakers, but we see is just an extreme lack of diversity in terms of, are we representing people of color, women, those with accessibility differences, difference in ages, etc., as well as just diversity in terms of new voices. And we feel like the new voices have a lot to offer. So United Search started to tackle that problem and get some fresh faces on the stage.
How exactly does United Search work? It's basically a mentor-mentee program, correct?
Yeah, correct. It's a pretty simple program, actually. So what we've done is we've gathered a lot of different folks who are interested in speaking. We're generally looking for people who have a bit of time in SEO but haven't been on the stage much. And we're pairing them with mentors that have volunteered. Right now we have, I believe, 17 approved mentors. Quite a few more mentees than that. And the idea is to put them together, go through a program of around 4 to 8 weeks where we have the mentors essentially helping the mentees create a pitch and understand how to pitch it to different conferences, whether it's how to speak, how to put together a presentation, how to send out a short video or a pitch for it, as well as just once you're on the stage, how to make it stick. So the burden is definitely on the mentee to put the work in, to show us what they're passionate about, but we're going to get them time with folks who are very well known in the industry, seasoned speakers, and very well respected. We're so appreciative of our mentors for donating time.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, these are people in the industry that you do see currently speaking, and these aren't kind of no names in the industry. These are people that everybody should probably be familiar with and would maybe in some cases be a little hard to actually reach and connect with. So it's kind of great to bring people together in this program.
We have people on this list I'm so excited about that I wouldn't necessarily normally have an into, but just some folks who are speaking in the industry internationally, who are known both for their speaking prowess, but also just they're incredibly clever and really giving people. So it's a great program. We're hoping that beyond just getting more diverse speakers on stage, we're really helping to create a stronger community and some really great friendships in the meantime.
That's great. So where can people go if they want to look into being a mentor or a mentee or just check it out and learn in general?
Fantastic. So we are found at unitedsearch.org. If you want to go directly to unitedsearch.org/apply, you'll start a questionnaire type form, questionnaire for mentees. So we're really trying to filter and look for folks that we feel need support and that we're most excited about seeing on stage. So we are prioritizing different diversity requirements. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or even just helping out the board, there are 4 of us right now. It's all volunteer. It's a small but awesome gig that we have going. You can send an email to info@unitedsearch.org as well, and that'll get the group.
Speaking of ranking factors, I did want to chat about sort of the state of the current SEO industry. And my first question around this is, as SEOs, my question might be slightly rhetorical or hint at my opinion, but do you think we're, as practitioners, maybe too focused on ranking factors and kind of hanging on every word Googlers say a little bit too much? I mean, is this something that you can over obsess about? And is that where the industry is at now, right? Like, are we in a healthy place with that sort of balance? What do you think?
I'll possibly tell what your opinion is there, Dan. You've kept that very deadpan. Well done. I mean, also, I'd never quite answered the question earlier on about the controversies you mentioned from way back in the day, that Moz would get flack for various things and all those kinds of side of things.
We can tie into that, yeah.
Well, so I mean, I think the first point is to say this is not new. The industry has been like this for as long as I've been in the game, and if it wasn't Twitter trolling, it was trolling in the comments. So it's definitely not new. My view is that I have a somewhat nuanced view. I simultaneously hold the view that the industry pays far too much attention to the minutiae of things that individual Googlers say, or the fact that we'll get a news story on an industry website that says that dissects a sentence that one of the Googlers said in a webmaster hangout or something, and there's really nothing new there. So
right,
it's just obsessing about like minutiae that probably isn't even real. It's probably just the way they spoke that day, or the whatever it might be. So I think that I think we do pay too much attention to some of that minutiae. On the flip side, I'm guilty of some of this stuff, right? I mean, I interviewed John Miller on stage at Search Love London and spent a lot of time just grilling him about minutiae. So guilty, but that ties into, I think, the consistency that ties this together is that I think, do we obsess too much about ranking factors? My opinion is no. I'm going to say, actually, the way I think about ranking factors, they're everything. They're everything about SEO. Because what I mean by ranking factor is the attributes of your website that cause you to perform better or worse in organic search. And
right.
That's the game, right? Like that's literally what we're doing here. And so, and so I guess the subtlety is like, yes, we need to understand this stuff, or yes, we need to get better at playing in that competitive space. I always like the definition of SEO as competitive webmastering, and like there are elements where it is a game, and you need to understand that. But the flip side is I spend a lot of time telling the Search Pilot crew that what we're doing business, not science. That's one of our little mantras is it's only academically interesting to know, exactly what percentage importance to weight this particular ranking factor versus that particular ranking factor, right?
Right.
Because that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is build the best page we can, and or build the best website we can, and it just doesn't matter. Like, we might want to know X is better than Y. We don't need to know X is 0.12% better than Y.
Right.
And when we do, what we want to know is that the page if we can get to that kind of accuracy and granularity, because there's massive website or huge amounts of traffic where that kind of percentage difference makes a difference, what we need to know is this page is better like this. And we need to be able to build good hypotheses and test them. We don't necessarily, it's academic interest that kind of reverse engineers that back into saying the reason this page is better is all of these tiny little factors. And I think I think probably most of the criticism of ranking factor studies and ranking factors work generally is that it doesn't connect the other way. It doesn't connect in an actionable way to things you can do to improve your website. And so I love thinking about ranking factors if I'm thinking about something actionable. If I'm trying to build hypotheses or I'm trying to test stuff in the real world that literally is like, this page will be better if we do this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when I think about optimizing a single page. Let's say it's an article. One thing I've been doing a lot lately is taking a tool called TF-IDF tool. And disclaimer, Google does not use TF-IDF as a ranking thing or whatever, but it's a valuable tool that what it does is it analyzes the top 20 results in Google for a given keyword, and it spits out the 1, 2, and 3 word phrases that most commonly occur on those top 20 results. And then I, as a human being, can critically look at those. And what I've been telling clients is you need to make your page topically complete and make sure there's no topical gaps. So if they're writing a piece of content about, silver coins and they missed an important key point in history or aspect of silver coins, like junk silver coins or something, like we can make their page better, which is what you were saying. To me, that's not, I've been trying to find a way to articulate what this is. And I think search principle is kind of the term that comes to mind for me. Like that's a principle of really good content, but it's not trying to get something to fit into a ranking factor that I can then look at this page and say, well, this page more fits some metric of a ranking factor. So how does that make sense what I'm trying to articulate? And how is there a way that you would describe what's sort of happening there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is, you mentioned that TF-IDF is not how Google is actually doing the evaluating here. So I think one of the challenges, one of the ways that people speak past each other when they're talking about this stuff is that a lot of people, when they say ranking factor, they mean things that we can change that we know Google uses as our ranking factor.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Whereas my definition of ranking factor is the things Google is actually measuring. And so therefore, in other words, we don't actually know what are actual ranking factors. We know things that are correlated with ranking factors. We know things that appear to influence ranking factors, but we don't actually know, for example, it's very unlikely that content length is a ranking factor, right? It's very unlikely that Google has a thing in their algorithm that says, we mainly want pages this long. And if it's a bit longer or a bit shorter, it'll do less well. It's very, very unlikely that is true. But it's quite likely that for any individual page, that you could have a page that was too short, right? And it just didn't have enough words on it to be a good enough page to rank well. And so, if I say this page is too short, I'm not saying length of page is a ranking factor. I'm saying we need to. There's other things we need to do that will influence a bunch of things that are ranking factors. In other words, I guess my definition of ranking factor is a bit more academic. It's like there are some ranking factors. We don't know what they are, but they're important, and we should be trying to do things that we believe influence them.
That's my definition too. I've been thinking of it as more like the page length is like an input, where like being topically complete is an input that then results in, like you said, a correlation. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of semantic issues with how SEOs communicate. I also wanted to get your take on, you mentioned a little bit, but when I started on SEO in 2009, 2010, it was blog comments. There was a lot more closeness among the community that I felt, at least back then, even on Twitter, early Twitter, early social media. Where do you think the community is at right now? Because as I mentioned in the email to you before we spoke, I feel like it's fragmented and there's not much of a central focus in the SEO community at large. What's your take on that?
Yep. I think you're right. I wouldn't say it's unique to our industry, though. I think this is a feature of the size of the internet as a whole. The internet is probably, I don't know how many orders of magnitude bigger than it was in 2002, or even 2009. And some societal level things. So like, I think fragmentation of filter bubbles and those kinds of things are, they're sometimes they're what people explicitly want, as in, I want to spend time with people who think like me, or I want to spend time focusing on the things I want to focus on and not distracted by other things. And then there's other times where it's more just kind of implicitly what people appear to want. In other words, they click more often on the things that align with their interests, and they follow the people who seem to be nice to them, and those kinds of things. And so you end up with these kind of segmented graphs. And I think that's probably, I don't think that's any more true in SEO than it is in kind of society in general. It's just that if you think about the SEO community a decade or 15 years ago, it was small enough that everybody knew everybody a bit more, perhaps. I mean, if you look at the growth of, Rand had some stats about the growth of job titles, including the word SEO over time, for example. Yeah. And that's just one proxy. And I think there are many ways where it's just there's a lot more people now, and naturally that fragments. So I don't worry about that unduly. I do worry a little bit. The thing that I worry about, kind of in a more actionable sense, is what do we do about the folks coming into the industry today? There's a difference in a certain sense. If you think about in the real estate world, everybody talks about the boomers who bought their houses in the the 50s and the 60s and effortlessly made 10 times their money, compared to folks today trying to get on the housing ladder and buy their first property. There's some of that, right? When I got into SEO, it was pretty easy to get well known. You comment on Moz a few times, and then Rand knows who you are, and Bob's your uncle. What happens for somebody coming to the industry today? Having said that, I've been at the kind of coalface of that, helping our team, helping people who come into our team fresh, with no industry background or experience. Yeah. And I haven't actually seen too much of a meaningful change in that. Like the best people, the people who are most driven, motivated, intelligent, interesting things to say, still get themselves known quickly. And if I think about the people who did that in 2011, sure, there were people who went from new grad or like new into the industry to MozCon stage in 18 months. And there are people who've done that in the last couple of years. So maybe the odds are changing. Maybe it's harder to do that, but it's still possible. So I think that's the thing that I spend most of my time kind of thinking about in a kind of actionable thing. Like the only thing I worry about is can somebody coming into this industry still make it? And I think they can.
Yeah. And speaking of these industry things and events, Distilled was known for running events, Search Love, and back in the day, Link Love as well. How are you handling running and thinking about SEO events at all during COVID? Maybe, so talk about that. And maybe if you see a light at the end of the tunnel, I mean, do you see in-person events? Not that anyone can predict what's going to happen in the world, but, are you even thinking that far, or are you just focused on virtual events, and how's that going?
So, I mean, it has been brutal. We unfortunately, we had to scale back a load of things. We had to postpone, and I mean, I think the early days of the pandemic, I wish I'd been journaling every day, because it was one of those strange times when you could watch your own mind change. Do you know what I mean? Like, I vividly remember that few weeks where I went from thinking, things will probably be okay, we'll still be able to run our events, we'll just have to be careful, to, oh, I'm a bit worried about this, to, this isn't going to happen, is it? To, we've postponed it, in the space of, I mean, what, like a week, 10 days? Yeah. It was unbelievable. And I guess that's what exponential growth does to you. But because I was in Seattle, my last trip before lockdown, I was in Seattle in early March, and I went out for dinner with a few folks, and it was the first time that it was empty. It was a Wednesday night in downtown Seattle in a popular restaurant that normally you'd have to book to get in. and we were one of only 2 tables. And
Oh, wow.
we looked at each other and we're like, oh, like this is, even if the government doesn't lock down, like this is happening. People are locking themselves down, if you see what I mean. And
Yep.
Anyway, so yeah, without trying to predict the pandemic, because I think that's a bit of a fool's errand, we're committed to running Search Lab again. Search Lab is going to happen. We're going to be back to in-person events, and I think people are going to want them eventually. I can't promise that. We have tentatively scheduled dates, but I think what we are more focused on is the underlying commitment. Like we want to run. I think they're valuable for the community. I think there's people. It's the same with office space. Things will change. The new normal will not look like the old normal, but humans are still social beings, and one day there will be great in-person events again, and we will run some.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the split testing. So that the split testing is with Search Pilot, correct? And
that's right.
So I'd love to hear the benefits of this, and obviously people can go check out Search Pilot, or at least be aware of SEO split testing, because I think it's not really talked about a whole lot, to be honest. And I've heard a little bit of both sides. Some people like it. Some people say you should never do it. So I'd love to hear the benefits of split testing and kind of what you can accomplish with it.
Yeah, so the reason that I'm so involved in this now is that for me, this is the most exciting thing that's happened to SEO in my career. That the ability to attribute results to activity and to measure the impact of changes on organic performance is something that we've never had before. And so, it's not for everyone. It doesn't even work on every website. You need a large website. You need many pages in a site section. Those pages need to have to be based on the same templates, right? So think e-commerce product pages, or route pages on a travel website, or listings pages on a jobs website, for example. So if you're running a small SaaS business with a dozen pages on your website, then this doesn't help you, unfortunately. Though I hope some of that data might. So like, all hope is not lost, and we are publishing our results to try and guide everyone and the whole industry to learn from. But for the big websites, we've tried to mitigate all the potential downsides. So there's no element of cloaking. Google is seeing the website exactly the same way that users do. There is a structured kind of rollout of this stuff, and we can, if we depending on the exact implementation, we can make it so that any individual user sees a consistent site-wide experience. So they're not bouncing from template 1 to template 2 as they navigate around the website and those kinds of things.
Right.
And yeah, so the fun for anybody who isn't completely familiar with it, the fundamental way of it working is that the underlying math and statistics is somewhat similar to the kind of split testing that you might be familiar with from conversion rate optimization or user experience testing. But the difference in the implementation is that instead of showing half your audience one version of your website and half your audience a different version of the website, which is essentially what happens in conversion rate optimization, where you take version A and version B and show them to different people. Yeah. That wouldn't work for Google, right? There's only one Googlebot effectively in the kind of, if you think about how that works without cloaking. And so what we do is that we split pages. So we make the change to some pages and not to others. And it's a group of pages that have template A and a group of pages that have template B. And then some math statistical approach that is somewhat similar to the way that conversion rate testing works, with some nuances because of its pages, not users, allows us to get to statistical confidence, right? So we can say not only this is an uplift and it's of about this magnitude, but also here's our likelihood, here's our confidence rather of that we are in fact correct about this.
So are you changing, and we're going to wrap up in a minute, but just as a quick example, is this something like maybe changing a content template or a title like what are some of the things you're actually testing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost anything on site. So a hypothesis could range from we should change the kind of structured data on this page is one example. So what about if instead of having product markup, we had frequently asked question markup on this page? Or what if we have both? That could be the kind of hypothesis you might have. I already mentioned that some internal linking testing. So we've tested having or not having breadcrumbs, having or not having links to feature to related products, those kinds of things. We've tested content hypotheses. So like, should our category page have a paragraph of copy at the top of the page?
Yep.
Should it have more or less copy? We've done keyword targeted things. So title tag templates, for example. Should it have the brand? Should it have the brand in different places? Should it phrase it as hotels near location or location name hotels? Different kind of keyword research-based hypotheses. Essentially anything that would form an on-site change that you might do for SEO, we can split test.
Oh, cool. Well, that sounds exciting. Where can people go and check that out? And if you've published any data yet, or when you publish data, and then all the other places you'd like people to check out online, websites, profiles, etc.
For sure. So searchpilot.com is the best place for that. And we are we're newly rebranded since the spin out, and so we have launched an email list which we're publishing regular case studies on. So that's probably the place that people should sign up for. At searchpilot.com, you can sign up and get frequent case studies where we're trying to get below the get into the nitty gritty of what worked, what didn't in this test, what our hypothesis was, what the data and results were, and so forth. And then probably Twitter. That's where we're most active. So at SearchPilot, I'm at Will Critchlow, and that's the best place to pick our brains.
Great. I'll put everything in the show notes at evolvingseo.com/wire. Will, fantastic discussion. It's always a pleasure when we get to chat every once in a while. So thanks for being on Experts in the Wire, and we will see everyone next time.